the first question is, in what ways does your neurodiverse condition interact with other aspects of your identity? Examples include race, gender, culture, sexuality, or other physical or mental disabilities.
Yeah, so as far as neurodiverse, I am diagnosed autistic and ADHD. But it took me forever to get that diagnosis because I am cis female. So it is just all the research and stuff has been done on, young boys, and that is not who I am. And so it was not the traits that females present as opposed to males in some of this research that is just now emerging is not well developed. So a lot of doctors and people are hesitant to diagnose you due to I don't want to say the severity, but so many people think of especially autism, that is a thing you are now labeled with and stuck with forever. So they're really hesitant to diagnose you if they're not entirely sure, and the research isn't there to make sure they are entirely sure. So I mean that's an issue in and of itself. For culturally, I've been very lucky as I've grown up in a family that is very well versed in mental health and neurodivergent mindsets or just other members of my family have neurodiverse conditions as well. And so it's not exactly hard for me to, be diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, my mom has it right away. They were like, oh, that's a connection. But it was interesting seeing the difference between mental health, like depression, and neurodiverse stuff like ADHD, which is prevalent in my family and we have experience with, being compared to autism, because I'm the first one in my family that's been diagnosed. And even though other people may have some of those traits, they are not as well versed in what that means. And it's harder for me to advocate for myself because I will use language or terms that they're just not familiar with right now. Sorry, going down the list now. For sexuality, I identify as asexual, which I think fits very closely with autism. Just not in touch with feelings or social interactions or anything. And all throughout K-12, everyone's like, oh, who's your crush or whatever? I'm like, I don't know. No one, thank you very much. But it's the pressure that I should be doing this by this time, or I should have a crush, right? Whatever. Was very intense, and it helped isolate me. That's a whole other issue. And of course, isolating, not feeling like you fit in, that starts leading into mental health issues, anxiety, depression, etc. Yeah, I have all sorts of diagnoses throughout my life. Been in and out of intensive therapy, in and out of hospital stays, and it's just very interesting how being undiagnosed at that time played a role in it, because I wasn't getting the support that I might need. So instead of necessarily looking at accommodations for school that are based off of my autism and ADHD, I was getting stuff like time extensions because I couldn't finish it on time because it was so overwhelming due to the anxiety, right? But that the root cause was the assignment itself and how it was structured. So that was really difficult for me to wrap my head around. But it's just everything's so interconnected, you can't escape anything. I mean, even physical health, not many people realize that your brain, well, I mean, obviously your brain connects to everything, but your brain in some seemingly random condition affects so much else, even if it's not directly. I had a lot of foot pain and I thought it was just kind of normal, or I just kind of dealt with it for like 8 months. And then by the time, like, I'm still dealing with it like a year and a half later, and it's not happy at all. And it's just like, I couldn't voice the pain. Even now, I can't describe what it feels like. It's just, it's there. And it's different. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, the classic autistic trait where it's not being able to notice your bodily sensations and whatnot, not being able to feel hungry, not being able to, realize I'm thirsty or whatever, has led to a lot of like other health issues. And then of course sensory issues that are related to my autism stuff has led to ARFID, which is an eating disorder. I mean, it's not one of those eating disorders that you recover from super quickly or at all sometimes. I mean, because it's a sensory thing, it usually sticks with you for a long time, maybe your whole life. And it's just really hard. You can't just get help, because oftentimes, like, when I was in intensive treatment, they would just like try to force me to eat certain foods. And like, it was not well. Like, I was having, like, I still have like issues and huge anxiety around like eating things like carrots, because that was like, I was fine with like raw carrots prior. They tried to make me eat cooked carrots, which is a huge sensory thing for me. And now I can't touch them at all. So it's causes more harm than good in some cases. And it was really hard because I was not diagnosed with autism at that time, just ADHD. And they, when you're in eating disorder treatment and you are nutritionally deficient, is probably how you say that, they will not let you take ADHD meds sometimes for that, because ADHD is primarily treated through the use of stimulants, so Ritalin, and stuff like that. And those stimulants are often appetite suppressors. And so if you're already struggling to get enough nutrients in your body, they do not want you on anything that'll help contribute to an appetite suppression. If you're actively restricting, they don't want to encourage that through the use of medication. But at the same time, if you're unmedicated, you have more anxiety stuff and more depression. At least I did. And I was also trying to manage school during a lot of this time. So I couldn't focus on schoolwork, wasn't getting things done. And it was just not a peachy time. But I mean, it's tough, because it's like, that is one of the ways you have to do that. I mean, if I was allowed to continue on my medication, I don't know if I would have recovered in the same way that I have. And like, it's interesting, as a lot of facilities specialize in one thing or the other. So the eating disorder facility was a lot better, obviously, at eating disorders than it was at the general like anxiety and depression issues. When I was moved to another facility that was generalized like anxiety and depression, they were no idea about eating disorders. And so that was super triggering all the time, and just a nightmare to deal with.
And then I guess something that I'm curious about as well, when it comes to like autism and ADHD, for like the longest time, they wouldn't even diagnose both of them at the same time. Like if you had autism, you had to rule out ADHD, and if you had ADHD, then you have to rule out autism. Yes. How do you think it sort of plays out when those two interact, as far as just like, your life and your brain?
Yeah. Okay. So like sensory issues, sitting for me is a long time. I can't sit in one place, right? That could be ADHD. That could be sensory issues from autism, right? So they kind of play into each other. I can't sit in a hard chair because of a sensory issue. ADHD means I want to be moving anyway, so I'll constantly be shifting positions, and that's a way I'm coping with the autism sensory issues through the ADHD. So I feel like they're more separate than a lot of people do, at least for me, because it manifests in very different ways. But I also don't register emotions and thoughts the same way a lot of people do, or I've heard a lot of people say they do, which I think is also a common trend with neurodivergent people.
How do you reconfigure your life to sort of accommodate your unique needs in terms of like sensory needs, educational needs, emotional needs, that kind of stuff, after knowing that you are neurodivergent?
It's definitely a learning experience. I'm trying all sorts of new things and trying to become more comfortable with the fact that like I may present differently than other people, and that's okay, and I just kind of have to deal with it, and like that's what I need. So I mean, for example, I was having huge sensory issues yesterday, still had to go to a doctor appointment in downtown Seattle, so on go the noise canceling headphones, right? And they're not the electronic ones that look all fancy, they're like the construction worker ones, right? So those are the ones you typically see like in, public schools when like there's an autistic kiddo running around with a one-to-one aid. And it's got a lot of connotations with it for other people, I think. And I'm still struggling with the fact that sometimes I just need it. And I don't think I'm using it outside of like those moments where I absolutely have to, because there's still that stigma present for it. I have to say though, there are some things that I just appreciate so much. I ran into a friend actually on my way to the doctor's appointment, like coming out of the light rail tunnel of all things. And I had those headphones on, and we were walking down the street and we're having a conversation with my headphones on with stuff going, and she was amazing, and it made me feel so, for lack of a better term, normal and like a human being. And it was just like, I got so excited, I like actually texted my dad like 5 minutes after she left. I was like, oh my gosh. But like, I don't think that should be the exception. That should definitely be the norm. And like, just to know people are going to treat you the same way, and to like have that, and it's just so reassuring and lovely. And it's, yeah, but trying to accommodate and trying to figure it out is so hard, because you need to balance your needs and what will help with whatever stigma's going on, with whatever you need to be presenting as. It's not very professional if you show up and you're holding a stuffed animal, right? But maybe that's your comfort item, your sensory item. Yeah, so the difference between like my parents' generation and my generation, where younger people interact more and are more accepting and like willing to work with you on whatever level you are at. So whether you have noise canceling headphones or whatever, and they'll just treat you like they would any other person. I feel like the older generations tiptoe around you, or if there's something there's something wrong, or they consider it rude of all things. But anytime, like I've interacted with a lot of older generation stuff, and anytime I've asked someone to repeat themselves, or like I lean in and say, I'm sorry, they kind of get all like upset. Like I didn't take my headphones off to ask.
And I guess like some of this is probably just, basic human decency, but if you had tips for people who like might not have had much experience with other, like with autistic or neurodivergent people in general, what would you suggest if they're like just meeting someone, for example?
Yeah, I mean, if someone discloses to you, I mean, I guess the difference between like meeting someone that you suspect is neurodiverse versus like someone who introduces themselves as neurodiverse, I feel like not many people walk up and are like, hi, I'm Clara, I'm autistic, it's a lot more subtle. And I think just treat people with basic decency. And then the other thing is like, try to be accommodating of requests. I know that a lot of the time I just don't, like, if you see someone doing something that's not actively being destructive, harmful, or like causing an issue in general, don't say anything. That's not a problem. You don't have to ask. It's just like you can treat them the same way you would treat any other person, and just do the best you can. If they need an accommodation and they tell you that, accommodate them, right? Like, I don't feel like this is super hard. But it's like, don't read into things. If someone's doing something differently, just be like, okay, here you go, and whatever. And I feel like younger generations are getting better at it, to be honest. And I feel like it's just kind of like educating yourself. You're not going to know everything about every, condition, every person, everything, because everyone's different. And so trying to take the time and understand what a person is going through or what they need is very important. Especially if it's someone you're going to be interacting with a lot. So if I'm on the subway or whatever, I don't and I'm wearing my noise canceling headphones, and no one has to say anything, and you don't need to know why I'm wearing them. Like, I'm never going to see you again. Leave me alone, right? But if you're curious as to why I am, Google it. You Google, why is a person wearing noise canceling headphones on the subway or whatever? Why is someone wearing this at a concert or whatever? Google will tell you. And it's just like, you don't need to invade the person's bubble in order to deal with your own curiosity. That being said, if it's someone you're meeting as a new coworker and they disclose that they need some extra help, or they mention that they're autistic in passing, or they say, I have issues with this, and you don't fully understand that, instead of pestering them with a ton of questions, maybe try Googling what they have said and told you, because you can learn a lot that way. Or maybe it's are you open to talking about why you have noise canceling headphones, or why you want to do this? Asking if they're available to talk about it before asking about it is so much better than just straight up, why are you wearing that? I think it just kind of respects the person's privacy, and it respects their energy and their boundaries. And that shows respect, and it's a huge thing, and it gives them, if someone said that to me, I think it would give me a lot more of a feeling of I am a person. They see me as a person and not someone lesser than, for needing this. And then I can choose to have the conversation. That shows that you at least have some understanding. You're taking the time to know how to talk to people, right? You put in effort, or you've learned some information on how to respect boundaries. When I was being diagnosed for autism, the person who was evaluating me told me that I had a milder form. Now, if you're familiar with the autistic community, there is no mild, there is no high, there's no high or low functioning. Everyone deals with it in a different way, and everyone struggles in different areas. So being told that my issues related to autism are not as bad as others feeds into that imposter syndrome, right? So the medical community doesn't always take me seriously, because I have learned coping skills, whether they are good or bad, or I should say beneficial or harmful, they could be really bad for me. But if I'm still presenting well, it's seen as I'm not as severe a case, right? So it's just the stigma from medical communities, and the idea that there are different levels of something, it really feeds into imposter syndrome as well. Mentally, UW counselors, I've heard a lot of stories about them. I haven't interacted myself, but it sounds like they're just a short intervention, and then they refer you to people outside of UW. And what? Like, if you don't have medical insurance, I mean, obviously you have to for certain situations, but like, if your insurance will not cover outside treatment, like, you're just stuck at that point. Like, you can't get the help you need because there's nothing within the system. Also, UW medical stuff is so freaking long of a wait time, like, unbelievably so. For my feet, I got a referral for a neurologist back in February. The earliest appointment I could get was beginning of August. Yeah, but like, trying to find stuff outside of UW is also really tricky. If you are not well versed, it's like so confusing and impossible. And putting that on top of someone who's already struggling to do themselves is so hard. I mean, I'm so happy that I have the support from like my family, especially like my parents, who were able to go and make the calls to insurance, make the calls to all these facilities, interview, like, or not interview, but like set up appointments with therapists and whatnot. Because if I was left to do that on my own devices, there's no way it would have happened. Like, if I'm in a state where I can't even sit up and feed myself, I cannot make an appointment to go see someone about it, right? Yeah. I mean, and I think that's one of the things a lot of like neurotypical or like students who are not dealing with the same kind of struggles at UW don't quite understand is the extent and effort you have to put in to get treatment. And I mean, I have daily doctor appointments right now on First Hill. It takes me an hour to get there and an hour back from campus. So it takes me about 3 hours a day that I'm taking out of my school day to go do that. And people are like, oh, couldn't you just do your homework during the mornings? Or what if you tried getting up earlier and doing this? And I'm like, I cannot do that. And then like, my feet are really bad, so I can't just walk. Like, I can't walk to Drumheller Fountain. I have to take a bus around to get to the hub. There's so many extra things you have to go through and extra hoops you have to jump through. There's just so many different things that if you don't actively have to deal with it, you're not going to notice it. And I mean, a great example of that right now is for physical mobility issues on campus. They have the AuDHDer campaign going on right now, which is great. I mean, it's just people pledging for a week to only use like places, or only get to places using paths or elevator, or not elevators in this case because they want to keep them open, but only going to places based on the way that a wheelchair user might be able to get around. So that means no stairs. That means doorways that are too small. That means any doors that have steps leading up to them, or that don't have a push button to open the door. Yeah, so it's like, I see that a lot. As my feet get worse and, it starts creeping up my legs, I start having issues with stairs. And all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out where elevators are, and it's really hard. So I think it's worth checking out, I mean, the disabled community from a physical perspective, as that makes it tangible, and like, you realize how big of an impact it is when you do stuff like that. And it's so much harder to do that if it's a brain thing, because you can't just change your brain and try to do something differently. It's not how brains work. So even if you can't like participate in something like the AuDHDer campaign, you can follow like people in wheelchairs on Instagram who are activists and trying to raise awareness for the disability community. And I think that you can do the same thing with like autism, ADHD, all sorts of stuff. I mean, one thing I know I don't register with a lot is that neurodivergent doesn't just mean autism and ADHD. I constantly, like, those are the most prevalent, those are the most talked about, I feel like, in the current like usage of the term. But all sorts of stuff fall under that label. Like, I'm pretty, like, dyslexia, right? And unless you have that condition, you don't know how it will feel like and what you have to deal with. So trying to find people who've written stories about it. There's plenty of people out there. I mean, trust me, there may not be research papers yet, but there are tons of editorials and Instagrams and blogs and all sorts of stuff of people trying to bring attention to this. And yeah, I mean, try to get the idea as well from like older people. There's a lot of people popping up on TikTok now who are neurodivergent and like our age, like, right? Like that's becoming a thing now. I think it's worthwhile hearing from people directly. I think it's worthwhile hearing from people your age, maybe older, maybe slightly younger.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you're hoping to touch on in terms of like what you want neurodivergent people to know, or what you want neurotypical people to know, or like people who aren't really sure like how they fall?
Yeah. I mean, for neurodivergent people, just like trust your gut and advocate, because if you think like you need something and you're having that imposter syndrome, you're having that little voice being like, do you really though? Like, probably. Like, so the fact that you at least have that thought means it could probably help. You have an idea of like, there's a reason you're trying to figure it out. And so it's worth digging into. Again, it's the kind of thing like if you know you're neurotypical, you're probably not even thinking you might be neurodivergent, right? So just the fact that you're thinking about it is worth some exploration and curiosity.